Sandy, you spoke a lot. There was a lot in there, but one thing I loved was the idea of identification, whether it's something you're seeing in someone else or even something you see in yourself. And so I want to start off with this idea of how do we know, because the natural flow of life, the natural rhythm of life as we experience things, because there was quite a few questions that came in and said, you know, where does just being sad because of something or just mourning because of something end and depression begin? And what are some of the things to look out for in ourselves to identify that and be able to do something, or even with those around us? It can sometimes be a bit of a blurred line. Are we on? Mikey, help me out.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you. That's really great. You've opened a door for me that I did leap over, and then I would have been talking for even longer and had a little barbed remark poked at me for that as well, because I said that there are a whole lot of features that one can look out for. So let's say, for instance, if you're having a major depressive episode, I said that it is ongoing for in excess of 2 weeks, pretty much morning, noon, and night. You don't see they are a little bit down in the morning, but by the afternoon they seem to have chirped up, and then the next day they might be sort of okay, then they have a down day. No, it is ongoing, unrelenting for 2 weeks. The irascibility factor often is ignored, so let me explain quickly what that is. It's when they label anything can just set them off. We so often think that people who are depressed just go and lie in fetal position under a duvet and they are crying. That's inaccurate. Their circadian rhythms are interrupted, so they can't sleep properly. Their appetite, either it is elevated, and sometimes, sadly, so just ask your doctor if you are concerned about weight. There are certain psychotropic medications that can give you the munchies, so it further exacerbates the appetite increase, or there's a total loss of appetite. And so I would say to you quite safely, if you observe that kind of pattern, interrupted sleep, and then very dark thoughts. So sometimes the NSSI, the non-suicidal self-injury, will present itself. The person doesn't actually want to die, but they're just feeling so desperate. So self-mutilation can take different forms. It's cutting, that kind of thing. And then there is obviously the very serious intent. The person is quite clear that they want out, and they want out quickly. And then you pretty much know that this is not something to be toyed with. Sometimes people say, is it not just attention seeking? Well, if somebody's got to resort to those measures to get attention, that in itself is a commentary that all is not well. And I would very, very earnestly encourage you to get that person into a space where they can be contained, and usually it will require a hospital admission, and that is the one way in which I have been able to accelerate access to psychiatrists, is when hospitalization can be justified. You will then have to work collaboratively with a psychologist and a GP in order to secure that admission. But that is a fairly lengthy answer to
That's good. There was a question, it's in a similar vein, but what are some tools that we can develop to increase self-awareness?
Okay. I'm going to start in a space that probably is not one I generally would encourage you to go into, but it's a lovely self-revelation tool. On the internet, there are so many depression inventories. Beck's depression inventory is quite a nice one. It's easy to score, and you very quickly can get a reading, either for yourself or the person that is trying to navigate a difficult space. And that can give you some indication. So that's the first tool in terms of identifying. Then what I would suggest, if you yourself are going through a tough time, it is not a bad idea to keep a journal. Now, last night, Mark Stonestreet spoke about Professor Martin Seligman, who's the father of positive psychology. And so your journals can start taking on a twofold purpose, and particularly if you are the loved one of somebody who is struggling. So first and foremost, if you start making entries into that journal around certain issues pertaining to interrupted circadian rhythms or dark thoughts or whatever it might be, so that when you see your doctor, you've already got something in place. But let's go back to Professor Martin Seligman, that it becomes also a tool where you can start giving expression to anything for which you are grateful. And now this Professor Martin Seligman that Mark spoke about last night ended up having a sample group of 1.4 million because the American government gave Professor Seligman access to the militia. And a sample group of 1.4 million really brings about some pretty compelling results. And one of the things that he found was the more we can do these entries into a journal, gratitude journal. So Oprah Winfrey discovered Professor Martin Seligman and actually had him on the show. And that was a tool that she found she could introduce to the layperson, but that Dr. or Professor Martin Seligman had already found. The third part of that journal is it becomes a beautiful dialogue instrument, because what so often happens, so it can't become a secret diary necessarily, but that individuals, when they go into dysthymic space or depression, because dysthymic is really quite a low-grade depression, they start to become very isolationist, antisocial almost. They start to become non-communicative. And if they can see that it is in their interest to try and stay connected and maybe give expression, even just with little one-liners, and that they can start communicating to those whom they love, a little bit of what their day has been like, what they've felt, what they've thought, those are sometimes have been proven to be very useful tools.
I think those are really helpful. I think also goes back to your three questions. I think your three questions would probably be also a good place to start.
Excellent. Those three questions will be there.
We had quite a few hectic questions come in, specifically around, and I'm assuming it's coming mostly from a parenting side, but if you have a child who goes through a hectic trauma, or a child who's dealing with some episode in anxiety, depression, whatever it might be, the one side being how can we actually be helpful in that, but then also there's like some stuff of, I'm dealing with my 11-year-old who has the suicidal thoughts, like how do I deal with that? Okay. So I think there's a real cry in terms of parents' hearts saying, I just don't know what to do, I don't know how to help. Okay. What would you...
And you can see my antenna shut up. When the child starts giving expression to suicidal thoughts, you need to get to a clinician that is equipped, whether they are skilled in play therapy. An 11-year-old would engage, that's a projective technique and can be used very successfully. It's not that you're teaching the child to play. They think they are playing, but they are actually using projective techniques to give expression to those deeper subliminal issues that are going on in their lives. That we need to start interrogating, what are they watching? What are they hearing? What are the subliminal messages that are being fed into their minds? What are the other stressors in their lives? And sometimes being in a neutral space within which to unpack Pandora's box, so to speak, often will serve the interests of their child infinitely more. Can I have permission to tell a quick story in terms of, and I will keep it quick, try to, but it's really to show you as parents the imperative of the role that you play in journeying with your child when they're going through a tough time. And this incident has stayed with me. I'm going to keep it very vague because obviously patient confidentiality has to be honored. But these two little girls presented to me at a very, very similar time. And they were both 8 years old at the time. And the one little girl, she had, let me first explain that the mother had taken in her biological brother to stay on the property, and the brother had hallucinogenic-induced schizophrenia, which is a story for another day, and often would hear voices, and on this particular occasion, the mum, in other words, whose brother was staying in the garden flat, woke up and she saw her brother running around outside around the swimming pool and without any clothing, and immediately ran down because she knew her little girl's window actually looked out onto the swimming pool, and she had been taking great pains to actually keep all knowledge of this uncle's reality from her daughter. And as she raced after her brother to try and stop him midstream, she looked up and she saw the curtains pulled apart and the wide-eyed, startled expression of her little girl. Press pause there for a moment. My other 8-year-old presents. And that was when I was still working with Littlies. At this point in time, I only work with older individuals. This 8-year-old was being sexually molested by her uncle. Now, bear in mind, the schizophrenic uncle was just running around without any clothing. No direct contact. And I am telling you right now, although this is not empirical study, I do not claim that for a moment. But it was very interesting for me to observe the processing of these two little girls of their trauma. Because the two mothers, the one in front of her daughter, absolutely fragmented. My child's innocence. And it was the one whose brother was a schizophrenic, who had been running around naked. My child's innocence has been lost. She has been violated forever. She'll never be the same. This is too terrible. The second mother, who had every reason to feel her child's innocence had been lost, simply made it clear, I am journeying alongside you. This is not your doing. This is somebody who's older than you, who's done something that he is going to be required to take responsibility for. But I know that you and I can journey together, and that things will eventually be very different to what they are now. And just by virtue of that containing factor, that's what I'm saying to you as parents, that often we become the barometer of their child's containment of emotion when we give them a space to safely unpack without fragmenting and bursting into tears ourselves. Even if it sometimes takes an Oscar-winning performance, we do not engage in toxic dumping onto the lap of our children ever. Okay.
That was good. I'm a parent, so it hit me way harder than it probably would.
Yeah.
Two different questions, and probably on either side of the spectrum. One being someone who's maybe sitting in the space of being a bit hesitant to talk or see any sort of person. They're asking the question of when or how is the right time to actually speak to someone when you are struggling with something, but you have got very good at putting up a mask, very good at those boundaries and defenses are up all the time, even though there might be a lot of darkness going on behind the scenes. How would you encourage that person, and how would they go about actually seeking that help?
Okay, so I'm understanding the question as being you have a family member or you have a friend who's reluctant to go into a therapeutic space, they just rather want to keep that mask up and stoically soldier on. That was how I understood it. How do I, as friend or family member, get that person to engage in the therapeutic space? So very often it is, and this is not meant in any callous sense, please, but you literally have to adopt a demeanor of learnt helplessness, almost when you're sitting there and they might have communicated to you that they are not in a good space, that you've got to not come up with any solutions. You've got to say, you know, I wish I had the skill. I wish I wasn't so subjective. But you know, I'm too close to the wood to see the trees. And I really, really know that your interests are probably going to be served better by seeing someone. And it must be, we call it fogging and broken record. You don't get sucked into that space of rumination with them over and over and over. You just each time, like a stuck record, say, oh, you resist giving one single solution. Oh, I just wish I had the solution. Now let's get to the person who's keeping up that mask, who is being stoic, who's not even confiding in you. That you need to be bold enough to say, it is possible that you have failed to experience the world as a safe and trustworthy space. Because there are times that I perceive you as hiding behind a mask of sorts. I know that there is a deep sadness in you, and yet you present stoically on the outside. It's those 4 F's: being firm, forthright, fair, but friendly. Got to be able to get into that space. Speaking the truth in love. That's an instruction. It's a scriptural instruction. We are not told to just speak the truth. That would be plain cruel. And we're not required to just couch everything in these soft, lovey-dovey terms, because it's like, goes nowhere. The truth in love is the thing that embodies these 4 F's that I've spoken about. And that you say, I know that the world perhaps is not a trustworthy place always, but there are spaces where your confidentiality will be held so sacred that you could speak and would be as good as speaking to the wall, except the wall can speak back to you, and perhaps perspective can be had, and it's not dissimilar to the debriding of a burn wound. You've got to get that dead flesh off so that the healing can start. Is that okay?
That was good. Other end of the spectrum. You might have someone who 10 years, 20 years plus has been on this journey, been in psychotherapy, and there's just this real sense of hopelessness. Have you, as a clinician, is that the right word? I think I'm right. Ever had a case like that where it's been long-term, long journey, and felt, actually, this thing's hopeless, I'm not really getting anywhere? I'd love to hear your view on both sides of that.
Okay. Sometimes an individual can reach a stalemate in the therapeutic space that would merit them perhaps seeking a second opinion. But I've got to be very cautious now, because this person is presently in my care. I have journeyed with her for well over a decade. I know she has teetered on the brink once, almost successfully, and fortunately, that intensive care unit certainly knew their oaths, and she was rescued from the very, very edge of the precipice. But there is absolutely no doubt that if this therapeutic relationship were to end it would further entrench the deep issues of abandonment that she has had to deal with. And now, in excess of a decade sounds a very long time, but given that this person has already, prior to starting therapy, been alive several decades with the most terrible things having happened, for her to be in a safe space is an advantage. And I have what I call a maintenance cycle. Sometimes people are resistant to going into that space where I say to them, I will continue, because I am a brief therapist. My preference is to give people tools, dispatch them, and get them onto maintenance cycle as quickly as possible, where there is at least a month gap, not a weekly gap, a month gap. That's just me. I'm not saying that every therapist operates like that. I'm just saying that this is because I want to hold them accountable. I want to dispatch them with the things that we have explored in the therapeutic space, and then I want to determine the extent to which they've been able to navigate that. So back to this 20-year, well, in this instance, it wasn't 20 year, but just in excess of 10 year, that month cycle has facilitated the opportunity for her to feel that there is still that, not lifeline, but that space where she doesn't feel abandoned, that she knows she can access me sooner than that month, should it happen, but she never has, certainly not of late. It would be extreme circumstances, but either a second opinion or to understand that that journey is something that allows for that person to feel safe, contained. They have no one else, and they feel that that is the space within which they can get perspective on a host. She's not revisiting the same issue over and over and over again. It's each time, and she knows she can open Pandora's box, as I said a moment ago, and close it and keep it there. Unlike if she has to go and speak to a friend, and then the friend sees her the next time and says, oh, hello, how are you? And she doesn't actually feel like talking about it then. She just actually feels like being with her friend. Whereas in this space, only when she chooses to come into it does she need to open it. Was that properly answered, though, Duncan?
I think so.
Do you think so?
I think so.
I'm hoping that the person who asked it, if that was not a satisfactory answer, you jolly well tell me, because then I must sharpen up and get my listening skills sorted.
I think there was just one aspect of, have you ever had a hopeless case?
Have I ever had a hopeless case? No. No, I absolutely believe that hope lives eternal. For me, just the privilege of journeying with individuals, I 100% know that no one crosses my threshold. Just like I said about you guys here tonight. They do not cross my threshold by mistake. And although I cannot pray with my patients, and I know, as I said, I'm long in the tooth, it's easier for me as almost a clinician at the end of my time to be bold like this. I'm not suggesting that young clinicians can be as, use that word cavalier a little bit earlier, but I will say to my patients, you do understand that what has happened there is not wrought by man. This, like for instance, the one person for whom I prayed, so I don't pray with them, but there's nothing stopping me praying before they arrive, and certainly upon them leaving. As they walk down those stairs, the number of times that I have felt compelled to cover them in prayer. And then I'll say to them, the story that I was going to say, that she had had this ongoing struggle with a husband locked in the grip of alcoholism. And I felt called to fast and pray. I had no feedback in the... She came back the next week. She said, the weirdest thing has happened. For the first time in 5 years, he hasn't touched a drink. And do you know that 10 years later, he has still not touched a drink? Now, if I were to even begin to pretend that it was some kind of psychotherapeutic intervention in what I told her how to navigate that space that brought about the change, then I would dishonor the source of my wisdom. And in that moment, I had to say to her, you have to know, this was wrought by a hand bigger than our own.
There it is. We're going to go one more question, and it's a slightly different area, but I think it's going to be really important because I think it's an area that we've waded into. I don't think anyone quite knows exactly how to do this right or exactly how to navigate the space. But in the corporate world, in the workspace, if you're a boss of employees, if you're an employee in a team, wherever you find yourself, if you are dealing with mental illness, what's some helpful things in being in a workplace, being someone who's suffering? Or if you're a boss and you've got someone on your team that you know is in that space and struggling, and now mental illness takes over, they have leaves of absence, how do you actually navigate that, be helpful, but at the same time, this is a company, there's contractual things, how do we navigate that space? I'd love to hear your opinion on kind of all of that, and that's where we'll end off.
Okay. Well, Duncan is naughty because he has left a question that is so meaty. The day-long workshops revolving around this, there's so many factors, depending on that boss, what MBTI or Enneagram type he is, he will engage with that employee in a very different way. What kind of mechanisms are available within their corporate context? What kind of medical aid facilities are there? A host of things need to happen. And I actually... You probably have discovered tonight, I'm not one who's quick to dodge a bullet. I warm to robust conversations around issues, but I am not going to take a question of such gravity and just with an empty platitude put a little plaster. I'm saying this is seriously something that has to be unpacked as a team, looked at carefully, look at the nature of all these different things that I've just touched upon now, and then see the way forward. Because unfortunately, a mental illness, like any other, could result in boarding. Ultimately, that individual has to be boarded. Because you could have, and I'm talking about the Myers-Briggs type indicator now. So let's say you have somebody who has a strong F component in their profile, the feeling component. He's the boss. And he sees this depressed individual, and he keeps just cutting this person slack, and he really knows the exact circumstances and feels that the rest of the team must pick up the slack. Next thing, he has got mutiny in the ranks because they are now up to here with having to carry the weight of that additional person. By the same token, you could have somebody who's a strong T, a thinking type person, who is just saying, you know what, we are here for profit and gain. I'm very aware that this poor person is going through a depressed phase in her life, but you know what, actually we've got to board this individual. You could equally have mutiny in the ranks because that team could be so attached to that individual. So can you see all the strands that you are opening up to me? So I would love 3 days for that one.
If you ask that question, you can come chat to Sandy afterwards. Sandy, I think we're going to end it here. So I would love to just hear your final thoughts, your final words. And like we did last night, I'd love for you to just actually pray over us. That's how we'll end it.
I think that I pretty much have said what needs to be said, and that I'm not going to embellish ad nauseum. I do want to say again to each of you that you carry within you that light is perhaps one part of it, but I keep having this notion of salt. And that we have had the idea of salt being a preservative and salt being a healer and salt being the agent that adds flavor. We know that, and so we delight in the fact that we are salt. But I more recently have come to understand that if we are really salty, we will make people thirsty for the thing that we bring to them. And I pray that each one of you will be able to, in the way you engage, uniquely, your unique fashion, God has really put you together wonderfully and fearfully, and go use that thing. Be the salt. Make people thirsty for what it is that you can bring to them. And I would absolutely love to pray. So, Lord, we honor you and we give you all praise and all honor. And Lord, I remain so aware that it is as we honor you and give you all that honor and all that praise, that we will experience the exact same victory that your chosen people experienced when the tribe of Judah, known for its ability to praise and worship, that chosen people of yours would invariably experience victory. I pray for victory in areas of our lives, over fear, over anxiety, over depression, that we will face the giant of stress as it presents itself and not permit that giant to assume proportions of enormity that are illegitimate, but that instead we'll run at that giant as David did at Goliath, with the authority of God in our hand, and that, Lord, we will slay the giants as they present themselves, so that we too can take ourselves and others into that land of milk and honey that you have promised to us. Pray that, Lord, this evening, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.